you had an unusual upbringing. And with your permission, I'm going to ask you to describe that upbringing and how that has affected you as a man and as a lawyer.
I did have an unusual upbringing. So I grew up in foster care for the most part. My mom was 16 when she got pregnant with me, 17 when she had me. My dad was a year older than that. I lived with my mom for the first 10 years of my life. I did visit my dad in the summers occasionally. But I lived with my mom. She got remarried. She had 4 more kids. And by the time I turned 11, she was getting divorced. It was a bad situation with her current husband. And so she sent me to live with my father, who had also gotten remarried and had a couple more kids. He decided that I didn't really fit into his family structure anymore. And so I got put into foster care. And for the first, I was 11 years old, almost 12. It was 30 days before I turned 12. I still remember I went to a diagnostic center, I guess, first. That's where I first got dropped off. I was not very good at following rules, and so I did not do very well there. And so I ended up spending the next 4 years in group homes. The other part of that is I was mostly full grown by the time I was 12 years old. I was 6'4", and I was real thin, but I was still much larger than most of the other people, and so they were nervous about me. So I ended up spending the next 4 years in group homes. They were not pleasant places to be, I'll tell you that right now. There was not, I think a lot still about those group homes that I was in, because they were, you didn't go to normal school, you were in a lockdown situation, and you just were there with kids from all sorts of different backgrounds. So I think a lot about that. I eventually went to one group home where there was a man that worked there. His name was Alan Shinney. Alan and I became friends. So the way we became friends is kind of a sad and funny story at the same time. The staff used to play a game of football with the kids, and so they would put the staff on one side, the kids on the other, and they would just have at the kids so they could hit them as hard as they could, and sort of take their frustrations out on the kids. Well, I was a big guy, and so I didn't get hit very hard, and I put a licking on some of those staff members, and so they would recruit me over onto their team to go against the other kids. And Alan, who had just started working there, thought it was ridiculous that we played this game, but he was a big sport guy, big jock, and he and I got along well. He said, you're gonna do well playing football somewhere. This is not the place for you. I need to get you out. And crazily enough, his best friend at that time was named John, and John was my caseworker. So John and he decided one day that I shouldn't be in this group home, that I would be better off in Alan's house. And so Alan, in the middle of the night, took me out and took me to his house. And that started my time in foster care. Alan and his wife Laura were the only people that were ever foster parents to me. To this day, they're some of the greatest people. I named my first son after them. Alan was a great guy, and that's how I got out. When you talk about how does that influence who I am as a lawyer or who I am as a person, I think I think about it all the time, and I think that there's really 2 factors that sort of define what it meant to me and how it influences me. So my foster brothers, for the most part, and I say this with all frankness, were better than me. I mean, they were better people. I was rambunctious. I was, in to do what I wanted to do. I didn't want to follow rules. I wanted to be I wanted to do whatever I wanted. And I often think about where those folks are now. I stay in contact with a lot of them. And when you define success for some of these individuals, it is not going to college. It is staying out of prison. The vast majority, I would say about 85-90% have been to prison and spent some time there. But their success is measured in the time that they get to stay out of prison. And or their time working as a convenience store clerk. These guys are in their 30s. And that's success in their life. And I think, well, what's the difference? Why do I have this better life when I don't think I was as good as them, or had the ability to be as successful as they had? And I will tell you that it sort of boils down to 2 things. Number 1 is opportunity, and number 2 is expectation. So because I could play football, and I was big and was born with some of those innate talents, I was provided with opportunity. I was able to build a relationship with Alan Shinney, my foster dad, who pulled me out of the group home and got me into regular high school and pushed me to play sports. I was able to meet my wife. We met at a young age. I was 17 when we started dating. And they provided expectations on top of those opportunities, right? So the opportunity to play football, the opportunity to go to school, and then Alan and my wife and Laura, Alan's wife, said no more dinking around. You're not fooling around anymore. You're going to take life seriously and do what's right. And so you look at those two things, the opportunity and the expectation, and that really is what's defined my life. I've had the ability to go to college because I could play football. I had a wife and foster parents that expected me to do well when I went there. And I wanted to meet those expectations. I wanted to take the advantage of my opportunities that I've been given. And I look at that now, and I look at the people that I represent, I look at people that I interact with on a daily basis, and when you define where those folks are in their lives, you think, what opportunities do they have, and what have the expectations been placed on them? And I will go to my grave thinking that they're lacking one or the other, and that's why they get caught up in some of the stuff that they get caught up in. And it also leads me to think it's one of the defining factors of why I do what I do, because somebody has to be there. Somebody needs to stand up and say, I want to provide an opportunity. I want to provide expectations to this individual so they know that they are worth more than whatever we're trying to define them as in the criminal justice system.
Do you sometimes sort of see your foster brothers in your clients?
I do, all the time. There's a term that I use called building a relationship of trust, BRT, with my clients. And it's very easy for me to BRT, to build these relationships of trust, because I identify with most of my clients. These are the people that I was in these group homes with. These are the people I grew up with. I know their stories. I know I've lived part of their stories. And so we have this ability to connect that I think is very, very helpful in our relationship. It allows them to open up to me and let us have more frank discussions about where things are going and what I'd like to do or what they would like me to do. So yes, it is very helpful.
How old were you when you had enough perspective to realize these things?
I would say I was probably in my 30s. It took a long time. For the first, I would say till I was probably 27, 28, so I was here at Mercer. I think I had graduated. Was the first time that I was able to slow down and think, okay, who am I? Right? Like, we all want to know who we are, and we think that we have this idea, and I thought that I did too, but I don't think you really do. At least I wasn't able to, because it was always moving to the next thing, trying to get past that next challenge or crisis that was going on, because quite frankly, in that life, it is a bunch of crisis. It is a bunch of challenge that you're trying to constantly overcome. And so I think it was until I was about 30 when I started to say, okay, what is it? Who am I? What do I want to be? What do I want to do? And so about then, I think that I was able to really start defining those ideas.
Well, you mentioned football.
Yes.
A few times, and obviously it provided you an opportunity. You played big-time college football.
I did.
At Utah State. We have a number of students in here who were college athletes, no surprise. What did athletics do for you other than providing the opportunity in terms of shaping you as a person?
So I think it again, two things that I would come to. I'm a big fan of lists. So number one, it taught me, if you want to be successful at whatever you do, you have got to put the work in, right? It doesn't matter what it is. If you just show up, you're not going to be successful. Now, when I was in high school, I could do whatever I wanted on the football field. I was bigger, stronger, faster than everybody. And, as a defensive end, I could run a running back down from the other side of the field for a loss. That was not a problem. When I got to college, that wasn't the case anymore. I mean, these are big guys, these are fast guys, and if I wanted to be successful playing, then I had to put in the work. I had to get in there in the gym early, I had to do extra, I had to watch the film, I had to do all of this extra work if I wanted to get out and just be successful on the field as whatever that was for me. Which led to the second thing is, how do you deal with loss, right? Because I went to Utah State, we didn't win a lot. I think we only won 6 games my freshman year. That was the most we had ever won. So there's a lot of loss going on. And the question is, how do you deal with that? I hate losing. To this day, I'm a very competitive person. I don't like losing. So how do you deal with that? And you can either internalize it and say, like, well, I'm a loser, or I don't have what it takes to win. Or you can say, you know what, I'm going to double down. I'm going to work harder. I'm going to go back and retool what I do. I'm going to rethink about this process and what I'm doing. How can I make myself better? And so those tools I got, I realized really quickly I wasn't going on to the next level. Those tools have stuck with me. They define my time at Mercer, at law school. They define my time now. I have a process that I go through when I prepare a case, and it's all about the work that you put in beforehand.
Well, Macon, Georgia is a long way from Utah.
Yes.
How did you find your way to the Mercer Law School?
So, I took a shotgun approach to applying to law schools. I had heard that Mercer had a fantastic legal writing program, and I thought, well, I probably should learn how to write, and I need to go to one that can teach me how. So I applied to Mercer based on the legal writing program, and they offered me a scholarship, and so I said, well, that's a good way to go. I'll go there. And it was a fantastic decision. So.
Talk about your time here. What memories do you have of your 3 years first in the JV program of things that affected you and developed you?
Well, I think the community that you develop with your fellow students, so you might not notice it as much now, but after I left Mercer, I had relationships with people that continued throughout, even to today. People that were in my class or assistant U.S. attorneys that I talked to. There's criminal defense lawyers around that I talked to, and even still some big firm lawyers that I talked to that I graduated with, and there was a relationship that I built with them. And the same goes for the professors. Karen Snedden was one of my legal writing professors, and she's been fantastic to talk to since I graduated. I don't talk to her as often as I did when I was first out, but she was great, and she's still great for those sort of things. But I think, so if you talk to my wife, she'll tell you that I'm a fundamentally different person from the day I went to law school to the time I got out. And she says it manifests itself when we argue about things. And I will tell you that the reason for that, law school, I don't think is set to teach you any particular law. You don't come here to learn what the law is to go out and practice. You learn that out in practice, quite frankly. But what law school does is teach you how to think about things and develop a legal process in your mind, like the ability to reason through whatever problem you have. And I really had two professors, three professors really, that influenced that decision making, or that ability to think through things. The first was John Cole. I don't know if y'all had him from Con Law.
Just retired.
I saw that. That's a very sad day. So I was a Con Law undergrad major, so I thought I was a big dog about Con Law, and I came into his class thinking I knew everything, and he very quickly lets you know that you don't know anything. But he had this sort of trope that he always used. I'm sure if you've had him, you know what it is. Yes and not yes, right? I think about that to this day, and it used to frustrate the living crap out of me when he would say that, because no, there has to be an answer, right? There has to be a right or a wrong way to do something. There has to be a right or wrong answer to this. And that's not the case. And he challenged me to think that there are two right answers, and you have to be able to understand and contemplate both of them to be an effective lawyer. And I think that's right. I don't just show up one day and say, oh, this is clearly the right answer. If you do that, you will not be a successful lawyer. This profession will chew you up and spit you out. There is no right way to do something. There are multiple ways, and you have to think about it as you're going through it. Like, you have to contemplate the other side. You have to be able to anticipate what's going to happen. Even when you choose a course and say, well, this is what's right for my client, you still have to be able to contemplate, how is the other side going to react? What are they going to raise in response to what I'm doing? And if you can't do that, you're doing a disservice to your own client, and you're not going to be as effective as you could be otherwise. And I think, besides all of the strict scrutiny and that sort of thing that we went over in his class, that was the most lasting lesson I think I got at Mercer, quite frankly. The second professor I had that I think really made a lasting impression was Reynold Kosick, and Professor Kosick passed away a little while ago. But I had him for sales, and sales is not the most exciting class, but he had the Socratic method down like no other professor I had when I was in law school. And he would tell you when you were up, when you were on call in class, and you had to be so prepared because he would crush you in class and in front of everybody, 90 students, right, sitting there, and you're just being filleted and nothing you can really do about it. And again, I was very, I thought very highly of myself, that I was very smart when I got to Mercer, and so I would challenge Professor Kosick when it wasn't my day on questions, and I would ask him questions that I think it irritated him. And so he would get at me, and I will tell you that his ability to ask questions and to tear apart what you're saying, even if it's what he wanted you to get out of the lesson, like if you come out with it from from the first answer, he doesn't care. He's going to go after you. But his doing that, and that's what I do in front of federal judges every day. I mean, they will go after you whether you're right or wrong because they don't. Let's be honest. They don't want to be on my side. They don't want to. They don't want to like my clients. So they go after you and go after you. And I think Professor Kosick was able to instill that tough skin, quite frankly. And I'll tell you a funny story about Professor Kosick. So I challenged him all the time, and so everyone in my class, everybody that was in there would say, when it's your time, you're done. Like, he's going to kill you. And so I decided, he would always talk about, when in sales, he would always talk about widgets, and he would use Guinness beer as his widget of choice. And so on my day, I went and bought a case of Guinness and put it up on his desk at the front of the classroom and put an apple on top, because, trying to, as my peace offering. And Professor Kosick, I kid you not, said, "Well played, Mr. Westbrook, you're off." And so I was off for the day. But yeah, I loved Professor Kosick for that reason. And I
don't get any idea.
And I had a third professor. So Professor Wong, and I think you were very apt in saying I did not like your class.
That's right.
But I will tell you that we all sit here, right, and we think, okay, I don't need to cheat, I shouldn't steal, shouldn't lie to my clients, don't sleep with them. That's all I need to know, right? That's what we all think. But there are other lessons in there that you don't realize until you get out. So one of the things that you talked to me about is big firm practice, right? And how many hours you work and trying to create this work-life balance. And I remember distinctly my first year, I billed almost 3,000 hours at Smith, Gambrell, and Russell. And I remember Christmas morning, my kids were opening packages, presents, and I'm sitting there typing a brief while my kids are enjoying Christmas. And I remember thinking, like, man, I should have paid attention, because there was a question about what type of lawyer do you want to be? Like, who is it as a person you want to be? And you have to think about those sort of things. And I think as third-year law students, we don't have the ability to comprehend really what it's like to be out in the workforce. And so while I should have paid more attention in class, when I got out, those lessons really stuck with me and led to a lot of my own self-discovery, my own process of determining who it is that I wanted to be as a lawyer.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Let's talk about that first job. How did you end up in the big firm, and what did you think?
Okay, so when I was here at law school, I did criminal defense work. I worked with public defenders, Houston County. I worked as a law clerk down there. And I thought that's where I was going. But I did fairly well in law school. And, I got encouraged to apply for the interviews when I came back from my second year, the beginning of the second year. And I said, all right, that's fine. So I did these interviews, and then I started getting job offers. And they were offering more money than I had ever thought possible. Right? This is before the legal bubble popped in 09 and 010, or 10. And so they were offering this extreme amount of money. And I was thinking about it like, well, this is why I went to school, so I can make money. This is what I need to do, right? And so I decided that I would go the big firm route. And that's what I did. I tried to justify it to myself by saying, well, I'll go into environmental litigation, and so I should be doing some good work there. But that's not how it worked. I was, and what complicated my practice when I first got out of law school is, let's be honest again, your first 3 to 5 years, you don't know anything. You really don't. And so you have the amount of time that you spend during finals, getting ready for a final exam. I spent a lot of time, and it was, I didn't go home a lot. I was up late. That's full-time practice, quite frankly. Because you have to be perfect all the time. And that's what I was doing there. So I followed what I called the rule of sevens. I left my house before 7, and I didn't come home till after 7. And I did that 6 or 7 days a week, and that was just how it was. But I did get some fantastic experience. I will say that, because the legal bubble popped in '09. There were 23 people in my incoming class at SGR. By the end of, well, I guess by the beginning of '09, there were 3 of us left. The real estate market dried up. SGR's a real estate-based firm. Most of these big firms are based on that sort of practice. And so it was brutal. And they also got rid of all the mid-level practitioners. So you had this giant donut effect where you had these new associates and partners, and you're getting the work. And so I had to write early on. It wasn't just doc review, which is what a lot of first years do. I was writing motions. I was litigating cases in court. I was doing a lot that I don't think you normally do. And it very frankly was a sink or swim. You know, if you're not performing at this high level, then you're out. And it's rough. You know, you're not prepared for it. I wasn't prepared for it as much as I think I wanted to be. I just wasn't.
I'm not sure anything prepares you for that extreme economic circumstance. I mean, that was once in a generation, we hope. Well, eventually you left.
I did. So I was there 2 years. I got laid off in 2010, and that's when I was 30, and that's when I sat back and said, okay, do I like where I am? Do I like who I am? Do I like where things are going? And that's where I really started to figure out, okay, how do I change? How do I become somebody else that I want to be? And that's where I decided I'm going to go back to the public defender side of things. I was happy there. I felt like I could have more time with my family. My wife and I, as I was saying earlier, we've been together since we were 17, so forever. 20 years this year. And the only time we've ever had a struggle in our relationship was when I was at SGR, because I was never home. And then when I was home, I was a jackass, because you're so stressed out and you don't know how to deal. I didn't know how to deal, I should say, with all the stress that was going along with it. And that transition is just ridiculously rough. Luckily, we made it through it, and I made a promise to her when I got let go, like, okay, let's figure out a way that we want to work going forward, because I'm going to be a lawyer. I like being a lawyer. That's what I paid for. I go to school. How can I do that and still be a good husband, and be the person that you want me to be, and be a good father to our children? And we came up with some ground rules. Like, when I'm home, and I need to be home sometimes. You know, we know that if you go to trial, that's game over. I'm gone, because it's trial, and it takes a lot to prepare for trial more than anything else. But outside of that, if I'm not in trial, if I don't have a deadline the next day, I'm home and be engaged at the house. You know, things like that. Those are some ground rules that we made after I got laid off from SGR.
So you're not sitting with the kids texting to the office?
Right, or answering emails, or researching. No, I'm not going to tell you that I'm perfect at that, because I'm very passionate about the work that I do, and the idea of my competitiveness, I think, and just sort of my nature and who I am. It's very hard to put it down, but I do. I make a concerted effort to do that. I'll wait till the kids go to bed, or if Amy's at work, then I'll do some stuff. But outside of that, my kids play lacrosse. I go to those games. I take them to their practices. I do as much as I can with the kids all the time.
So you went back to public defense.
I did.
And where was that?
Well, so I will tell you, it was extremely difficult to get back into the public defender world, because they when you start applying to those type of jobs, they see where you were at and be like, whoa, why would you want to come here? And why are you only coming here for a little while? We know that the legal market's popped, and as soon as it expands back open again, that's where you're going. And so it was really difficult. I ended up interning, going back to being an intern. I had argued cases in front of district courts and been very successful, but yet I was going back to be an intern so that I could try to break into the public defender world again. I had some clients, some private clients on the side, and I did their work for a good little while. But eventually I decided if I'm going to get back into this world and reset my career, I have to go back to school. I started looking at LLM programs. I started talking to professors here. There's another federal criminal defense LLM program in San Diego, and that was the one I was going to go to until I started asking for letters of recommendation here. And Daryl Danzler, I don't know if y'all have a chance to meet her, she told me about Mercer having their inaugural class. And once I found that out, I was all in because I really liked Mercer. I really loved my time here. So that's when I decided to come back. And that's how I got back in the public defender world.
So now you are a federal public defender.
Yes.
Talk about your clients. Who are your clients and where do they come from?
So in the federal system, unlike the state system, basically everybody gets a federal defender that we account for the vast majority of criminal representation in the system. Federal practice, unlike state practice, it's much more difficult because it's procedure oriented and driven. So there are rules for everything, and you've got to know those rules from forwards and backwards. The other thing that makes it fundamentally different is that in the state system, the process starts when you get arrested. That's when when a public defender gets involved. That's when you go to court. That's when everything happens. And so there's still a fact-gathering process that happens after the arrest. The vast majority of the facts come out after arrest. So I was a state public defender for about a year and a half in Henry County, and I would say probably about 40% of my cases I would get kicked out after you get all the facts and start putting things together. You'd get about a good chunk of them just kicked out because they didn't have those facts when they made the arrest, and there's knee-jerk reactions and that sort of thing. In the federal system, it's the exact opposite. All the fact finding's been done, all of the discoveries put together, and the government cherry picks which cases they want. So they want guilty clients, easy clients for them, or easy people for them to prosecute. They want the facts to line up and to go. So when you get a client, more often than not, they're probably guilty of what they've been accused of. And if not, there's a vast amount of evidence that would indicate they were so. Not only do you have the local law enforcement that have investigated the case, you also get ATF or FBI that have come in and redone the investigation and looked through everything they did and fill any holes that might have been there beforehand. So it's a much more difficult process in the federal system. But the clients themselves, I think they're the same type of people, right? These are people that have lacked opportunity, for the most part. Obviously, there's exceptions to these rules, but these are people that have lacked opportunity, lacked expectations in their life, and really come from a different rung than what we're in. You know, I hate to say it, it's sort of this moral relativism that we find ourselves in. Like, well, I would never sell drugs. Well, how hungry are you? And how hungry have you been? You know, these are people that have no other opportunities to go out and make money. And these are the skills in which they've developed to survive, quite frankly. You know, we think about gang members, that's something that everyone always wants to talk about. Oh, he's in a gang. Ooh. Well, you know, we all have our social circles that we've walked into and that we've developed to help us in our own situations. These gang members are no different. These are people that take care of them, that help them, that care about them individually. They care about where they're going and what they're doing. Yes, they break the law, but there's also a pseudo love there. I think that they find there's acceptance. There's a tribe, a structure that I think every one of us sort of yearn for, and that's where they find it.
Cool. For example, right now, what kinds of cases are sitting on your desk?
So 60 to 70% of my caseload involves drugs or guns. That's the big topic in federal criminal defense. That's what we always have. It's drugs or guns. Then you would have, I would say, another 10% of my caseload has to do with sex trafficking of children, that sort of thing. And then the rest would just be a hodgepodge of, like, I've done a couple in the last year. Well, even right now I have a couple bribery cases, public officials being bribed. I have a couple wire fraud cases, substantial wire fraud cases that get picked up. But it's just sort of a hodgepodge. Last year I had a represented individual that tried to blow up some people. So those don't come out very often, but we get a bunch of those. And then I would say 5% is illegal reentry type of cases. So folks, undocumented folks found here, they try to prosecute them in addition to deporting them, and we get stuck with that.
Would you mind talking a little bit about the case that you were devoting so much time to last week? You had a big sentencing hearing, and I'd like the students to hear about this.
Okay, so I represented an individual that was charged with 2 counts of trafficking a minor for sexual activity. In his case, he had a co-defendant. On first glance, it was a lockdown case, what I call an on-view case, right? Like everything's captured on camera, so there's really not much to fight about. His sentencing guideline range, in the federal system, every sentence is based on the sentencing guideline range. The guidelines, it's a huge focus of litigation. He had a 15-year mandatory minimum. His guideline range was close to 30 years.
What did he do?
Allegedly, he had enticed a minor to prostitute herself, and he was supposed to have been the pimp, basically, that transported this woman from Savannah to Valdosta, and where she eventually was uncovered, I guess, by law enforcement. But when we started digging, so there's the videos, right? I told you it's an on-view case. We start watching the videos. They're all body cams, and the story just does not make a lick of sense. The law enforcement officers arrested her for prostitution, which does not happen in a sex trafficking case. If you think a child's being exploited, you don't arrest them. The officer came to the door basically unclothed, which is also another thing that made us question, like, what is going on here? This does not make sense. And so as we started pushing, we come to learn that my client really didn't do anything. All he did was transport the person who asked to be driven from Savannah to Valdosta. Now, what the problem with that was he knew that she was going to prostitute herself, and so knowing that this person is going to do that, that does impose some criminal liability for him. But it's not exploiting a minor, it's not enticing a minor, it's not pimping a minor, and so it's not as egregious as what the government wanted. So we were going to try it, and we geared up. We investigated the officers involved, we investigated everything. We had the whole case locked down, and we spent a significant amount of time representing this guy and trying to make sure that he didn't get 30 years in prison. So as facts were coming out that the government wasn't aware of, they didn't investigate their case the way that I would recommend. So they weren't prepared. So I would have meetings. I'm a big fan of, let's sit down and talk about it. We get together and I'd say, look, you don't know X, Y, and Z, and that changes the dynamic of this case. And if you don't, you need to rethink your position. Based on that, we were offered a plea to something that had a 5-year cap. So that's a huge win just from negotiation standpoint, being ready to try the case, not backing down, and being willing to try it. We got something that was a huge win, from 30 years down to a cap of 60 months. So, but as part of that plea agreement, the government said they were going to argue for a sentence of 60 months because they thought that was appropriate, and it was such a huge deal that he should still get 60 months, regardless of whatever his guideline calculation ended up being. Probation was on their side. They decided that they wanted that his guideline range was 57 to 60 months, and so we put in work to prove that our guy was the least culpable person there. All he did was drive. He had nothing to do with this woman prostituting herself, and we had a 5.5-hour sentencing hearing, which is extremely long in the federal system, on Wednesday. And at the end of that hearing, we won 2 significant things. Number one, he got sentenced to 36 months, which is almost half of what the government was asking for. And the judge also ruled that he didn't have to register as a sex offender because it wasn't a sex crime. Both of those things saved that man's life. He's going to be able to get out sooner than later. He's not going to have to register as a sex offender, and he's going to be able to go forward with a cleaner slate than what he would have had otherwise. And that both of those things come down to putting in the work to get in and being able to see him as a person, right? We see, you get this crime. I have 2 daughters, and one of them's 15. The girl in this case was 16. And you see that when you look at the videos, when you read what's going on, you're like, holy cow, this is a 16-year-old girl that's being exploited. But our job is to stand back and divest from that emotional attachment that we all feel, that we all fairly well share, right? I mean, nobody wants children trafficked. I don't. Nobody does. But to see what are the facts. And then beyond that, who is this person that I represent? I don't represent somebody that is a sex trafficker. I represent somebody that's more than that. One of the things I talk about quite often is we are not the best thing we've ever done, nor are we the worst thing we've ever done. But we are who we are on the in-between days. And that's the person that you represent, is the person on the in-between days. And so being able to humanize your client and being able to present your client, the person you represent, even if they're accused of these terrible things, being able to represent them as a human and who they are on these in-between days. I think that's the goal, and that's the key to recognize and to be an effective advocate for them.
I want to shift gears for just a minute and ask you, again, a question I have your permission to ask, and that is the role that your religious faith plays in your life as a lawyer.
Yeah. So I think that's an interesting question, because I think a lot of times we wonder what kind of dichotomy is there. I represent bad people that have done bad things. Not bad people, I guess it's a misstatement. People that have done bad things. How can you represent them or be friends with them? And I'm Mormon, and I'm a very secular Mormon, but I am still Mormon, and my Mormon beliefs shape who I am still to this day. My moral compass, everything is sort of derived from that. And part of my faith that has always affected me, that I've always identified with, I should say, is Christ standing at the well with a woman taken in adultery and basically being a rock catcher. You know, people are trying to stone this woman for breaking the law, which she did, but he said no. You know, he stopped that because he saw her as an individual. And that same foundational belief is the same belief that I have. I do fancy myself a rock catcher. I stand at the well and make sure that nobody's, going after this person unduly, that I know the law, that I can protect her. That drives my practice, that drives my passion for what I do, because at the end of the day, you are their only friend. Everybody is out to hurt them and throw rocks, as many rocks as they can, and your job is to say, no, not this. And so that, I think, drives what I do.
Has there ever been a moment in your career when you felt that divergence, that something you were being expected to do as a lawyer was not consistent with your religious faith?
That's an interesting question. I mean, not that I can think of off the top of my head, but I have a very unique look at what I do, right? So we all have bosses sometimes, and we all have expectations about how we're supposed to proceed with things. But as I've told you, I've never been a rule follower, and so I've always been frank with my bosses and frank with the judges. I mean, you might want me to do it this way, but I'm going to do it the way that I think is best. And so and if that means I get fired, if that means you don't like what I'm going to have to say, then so be it. But at the end of the day, the only thing I carry with me is my conscience, and how do I reconcile that? I want to be able to sleep at night when I'm done doing what I do. So that's not something that I think I face really. And but I could see there are times where you have clients that want you to push a certain narrative that you find out not to be true. Now, that's an interesting dynamic, because you have a duty both to the court and I think internally, ethically, to not lie, and I refuse to do any of that. And I'd be very frank with my clients about that up front. Like, I will not lie. If it's something that I don't think is true, I'm not going to say it. I mean, I have to be honest. And I will tell you that very few times have I had a client that has said, this is the story I want you to tell. It's not as big of a problem, I think, as it is as it might be portrayed to be.
Talk for a minute about your family and how you balance this. Like, you talked about that a little bit, but I want to give you a chance to talk on camera about your wonderful family.
All right, so I have 4 children. I am Mormon. I've got two sons and 2 daughters. When I was in law school, I had my first 2, and I thought we were done, but my third snuck in just as I was graduating, and then we decided to round it out and have 4, so we could have two of each. Now, my kids this is a great, I'll tell you about this weekend. This is a great example. So my 2 older kids and my youngest play lacrosse. My youngest son is 6. He had a lacrosse game at 9 o'clock on Saturday. My next son, who is 13, had a lacrosse game an hour and a half from where I live in North Cobb at 9:30. And my daughter, my oldest daughter, who's 15, she had a lacrosse game at 11 across the other side of the county. So my wife and I have this running joke when it's lacrosse season. Well, I'll just see you I'll see you when the season closes, and that's every 3 months. So, but if there's a lacrosse game, I'm there. I'll take one of them, or whoever I go. We sort of diverge and cross like that. I make it a point to go do those sort of things with them. I also CrossFit religiously every morning. My 2 oldest kids go with me. I don't hunt, I don't fish, but that is a time that I get to have sort of that one-on-one time with my children. Outside of that, I make it a rule to go on a date with my wife at least once every 2 weeks. I know it sounds easy, but it's really hard a lot of times. Sometimes it's just going to the grocery store or something.
You all are outnumbered.
Yeah, we are. And it's much easier now with the 2 older kids because they can manage themselves, but my 2 younger ones, 6 and 9, my other daughter, Haley, is 9. And just because she doesn't play lacrosse doesn't mean she doesn't have a lot going on. The girl's into tumbling, and she's the princess of the family, so she gets a lot of attention for that. But you have to make time to spend the time with them, because you can get caught up in everything that you have going on, and meetings and phone calls, and this new case came out from the Supreme Court. I need to read that and see how it applies. I have so much I can be doing, and when I get home, frankly, I'm brain dead and I want to sit on the couch and veg out, but that does not work, right? Like, that is not, you can't be a good father and be the person that your children need you to be by vegging out every day when you get home and not engaging. So it's really small things that matter, eating dinner, asking them how their day was, that sort of thing, when you do see them and when you have time with them. So I think that's how I did it. I won't say I'm the best or the greatest, or I've got it figured out. It's certainly a struggle, but.
Well, I'm going to turn this over to the students momentarily, but this is your chance if you want to give any more advice to them, anything that maybe you wish you had heard as a law student.
So I've talked a little bit about the transition I had when I was 30, when I finally got let go in 2010 from SGR, and trying to figure out who I was. I would encourage you guys to do that now, right? And it's hard because you think, well, I got the bar coming up, and there's these external pressures about who it is, about getting a job and that sort of thing, and it might limit what you do. But I will tell you, don't consider money when you're making your decision about where you want to go work. Money will come. I mean, when you first start out, it doesn't matter what you're making. It'll come. And it's not going to bring you happiness. And that's something that I learned the hard way. I made a lot of money. I had a huge house. I mean, but I wasn't happy. I was miserable. So I would tell you, when you're determining who you want to be as a lawyer, think about that. Think about how, am I making this decision based on the economics of it? Am I making this decision based on what I'm passionate about? I love public defense work. It's how I define myself as a person. It's who I am. These are my friends. This is who I am. So it's not hard to go to work in the morning. It's not hard to get up. It's not hard to spend time doing it. It makes a difference. I'm happier. I'm able to engage at home. I'm able to engage in other activities. So I would highly recommend finding something that you're passionate about when it comes to work, because you're going to be spending a lot of time doing it. And I would also highly recommend putting the money decision to the side for a moment, even if it's something you do have to consider. We all have bills to pay. We have mortgages and whatnot, cars to buy. But it shouldn't be the driving factor, and I think that's the best advice that I could give. Find something you're passionate about, don't consider the money.
What questions do you have for Mr. Westbrook this morning? Mr. Foster?
You talked about gangs and drugs as kind of symptoms of poverty, and so, I wondered if you find yourself frustrated with sort of those guidelines and mandatory minimums, and if you feel like that tough on crime outlook is a societal good.
So, no, I think it's fundamentally stupid the way that we look at criminal activity and how we deal with it. We don't address the core causes of crime, which, as you identified, I think, quite frankly, are poverty. We know this. It's not something that's like eye-opening or, I'm a liberal and so I must think that it's, just poverty. No, these are facts. The Department of Justice has their own statistics out. Sending people to prison for a long time does nothing to rehabilitate or to deter crime or anything like that. It does nothing. In fact, if you send somebody to over 60 months in prison, it increases the likelihood of recidivism when they get out, because you disengage that person from their community and from society as a whole. And so now when they get out, what are they supposed to do? It's impossible to find a job. I mean, go talk to somebody that has a felony on their record. How hard is it to find a job? It's really hard. So now they have a felony on the record, can't get a job. Their family and friends are gone because they've been in prison forever. And what do you want them to do? So it's poverty. The way that we deal with it now is just, it's nonsense. And there's a shift in the way that judges are thinking about it now. So in the federal system, again, everything's based on the guidelines and these numbers that you have. Probably about 5 or 6 years ago, you started seeing a downward trend in the sentences that were imposed by federal judges. So about 40-some-odd% of cases actually get sentenced within the recommended guideline range. The rest are below. And it's because lawyers like me and other public defenders get up and talk about the person. They humanize them. They talk about the impact of what the sentence is going to be on that person. And we're talking, when you have a gun, when you shouldn't have one, or if you have drugs. These are victimless crimes for the most part. Now put aside those that deal with somebody and that person that subsequently dies. The vast majority of these, and I'll tell you, in this district, we haven't had one of those cases in 15 years. So I mean, it's just not something that happens. These are victimless crimes, and we want to send people away forever, not understanding what the consequences are. Not dealing, we want to put our head in the sand and say, oh, when they get out, they'll be fine. They've paid their debt to society. That's not how that works anymore. And we're recognizing that. So I think there is a shift, and we are very happily moving in the right direction as far as that's concerned. But I think that's a great question. Yes.
Being that you have worked as both a state public defender and federal public defender, I know most people say, or many people, not most, say that as a state public defender, most of them are overworked or it's a high caseload. Would you say it's pretty much the same as a federal?
No, that's a great point. So in the state system, they are overworked. So the ABA has standards out for how many cases you should handle as a felony public defender. That's what I was. And it's about 140 to 170 cases a year, which is a lot. My caseload as a federal public defender is a third of that, maybe. I think I probably handle 30 to 50 cases a year. But we're required, there's a couple of reasons for that. We have, number one, a better organization to drive how we get cases in the federal system. Number two, you can't handle 100 cases a year as a federal public defender. You just couldn't do it. There's so many moving parts, and it is so procedurally driven that it functionally could not happen. So, no. But I will tell you this. Here's another thing that I would consider. If you're thinking about being a public defender, you have more power than what you think. So just because you're assigned a case and the court wants to call it, so you go to a cattle call, the calendar call, call them a cattle call, and you have 70 cases on there. I remember my first time in Henry County, I just finished this program and went through all these Sixth Amendment cases in one of the classes, talking about the duty to be able to review your client's case, your ethical obligation to inform them correctly of what the law is and what the penalties are, and your ethical obligation to investigate the case, right? So you have to be able to do that and then advise your client to plead guilty or not guilty or go to trial or whatever. You can't do that if you've had 2 weeks to be on a case. You just can't. So I was there, and we had a calendar call in 2 weeks. I had 70 cases on the calendar. I went to the district attorney's office and I said, look, pick 2 cases. Outside of that, I'm going to announce not ready and I'm going to move to continue. You pick the 2 cases, and they refused to do it. So I put together a motion and said, I will be constitutionally ineffective if you make me do anything on this calendar for this client. I haven't had a chance to meet with them. I haven't had a chance to go through discovery. And if you have a trial and force me to go to trial, I'm going to stand up and that's what I'm going to say, that I'm constitutionally ineffective and that we're coming back to do this again. I won't be the lawyer, it'll be somebody else, but that's what's going to happen. And I will tell you, so my first 2 motions I argued like that, the judge was really upset. By the time I got to the 60th and 70th, he knew what was going on. And from that point forward, I set a tone about how I was going to litigate my cases. And as a public defender, even a new public defender, don't be afraid to set that tone. You are a lawyer just as much as anybody else in that courtroom, and you have the opportunity and the power to control what happens to your client more than you think and more than the government or more than the judge want you to think you have. Don't be afraid to catch those rocks, to stand there and say, I need more time to be able to think about this with my client. So that's a great question.
Make sure we get all parts of the room here.
This past Wednesday, we had a discussion about if we would represent Sandusky, and me being a Christian, I immediately went to saying no. You telling that story to the prostitute after Jesus Christ saving her and protecting her, and after she gave her life to Christ, when you represent clients of a different religion or different moral views than you, how do you go about that? And how do you, I guess, talk to them?
Talking with people that have different moral or more different religious views than myself? That's a good question. So understand that our job is not to, well, for myself, my moral compass has me deal with people at whatever level. They don't have to share my moral compass, they don't have to share my religious foundation for me to want to do my job. Me wanting to do my job and wanting to protect them comes more so from the religious underpinnings in my own view. So you start at very basic levels when you're building these relationships of trust with your client. And the first one, I think it gets it's very far down the road before you start talking about spiritual things with your client. You know, you're talking about people. You look at a hierarchy of needs. That's way down the line, and it's my personal view, and I'm not saying this is how it is, but my personal view is that when you start getting into those sort of things, those are comforts that come after all of your other needs have been met, right? If you've been fed and clothed and that sort of thing. And so really what I try to do is start at that foundational level and let my clients know they are people, and I see them as a person. I don't let my clients call me Mr. Westbrook. I don't let them call me sir. I find that to be repulsive. I want them to be, you are my brother or my sister, and I firmly believe that. I see them as such. So that's how I treat them, and where the conversation goes. You know, sometimes you are a counselor. Sometimes you're there to just listen and talk. And so that stuff can come up, and you can talk about it. But outside of that, I think that's something further down the road, and it's something I don't sort of approach from the first step. But I think you bring up another point that I wanted to talk about that I don't think I've covered yet. So there's this question of like, how can you represent somebody? I would represent Sandusky. I've represented people like Sandusky. The gentleman I represented last week was not like Sandusky, but I have represented people like Mr. Sandusky. As a public defender, as a criminal defense lawyer, my job isn't to get up and justify the actions that they've done, right? Like, my job isn't to get up and say, it's okay to molest 17 boys or however, whatever has happened. As a public defender, your job is to make sure that the Constitution is applied properly to your client, right? So you have to know the rules, you have to know the law, and you have to make sure that everybody else is dotting their I's and crossing their T's. And that is 90% of what I do, is making sure that that's what the government's doing, that that's what the police did, and that's where things have gone. I mean, if I win a motion to suppress, it's not because my client was innocent or that I believed he should be carrying dope. It's because the cops screwed up when they did the stop and that they didn't follow the rules. Now, if we don't protect the weakest amongst us, which are criminals, let's be honest, because nobody likes them, and everybody wants, that guy should go away. We have the mob mentality as much as we don't want to admit it. If we can't protect that person against the mob, we can't protect innocent people against the mob, and I certainly have represented innocent people too. So, I mean, that's something to keep in mind when you hear a criminal defense lawyer talking. It's not always, it's not a situation where we're trying to justify the criminal activity or what it is they have going on. We're trying to make sure that they're treated fairly and justly, and we try to humanize our clients.
Time for maybe one more. Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever had a case where someone who has been accused of something that just was so kind of along those lines, or kind of along those Sandusky lines, that was just so, like, we call it the Reg test, like it just so boiled turned your stomach that you found it hard to represent them or even declined to represent them?
Yeah, so the first case I ever argued in front of the 11th Circuit was a gentleman that wrote stories. He was charged with obscenity violations, and he wrote stories about sexual encounters with minors. And I couldn't read the stories, like it killed me. And I had, I couldn't, for like 3 weeks, I be around my kids because I just felt gross, right? And I worried about that. I worried about that exact question. Like, I have to go up and stand in front of the 11th Circuit and say, why is this an infringement on his First Amendment right to write these stories, when I don't think people should be writing these stories, and quite frankly, I find them to be obscene. But then you step back and think, well, I can compartmentalize my own feelings about the criminal conduct, and I can look past that because I see my client as a human, and I see my client as something more than just these disgusting stories that they have. And the 11th Circuit thought it was enough of a question that they wanted to hear oral argument on it. So this is something to stand up and talk about it from his perspective. So in that regard, I was very, it was a test for myself in that case, but I was happy with the fact that I was able to get up and discuss his case in relation to the First Amendment issues and be able to, I think, adequately defend him. But that does happen. Not very often for me, at least, but it does happen. And it's hard. It's something you got to be able to internalize and make sure that it fits your moral compass.
Can you stick around for a few minutes and chat?
I sure can.
Join me in thanking you.